He was the first man to leave the Earth, the first to orbit her. This experienced Soviet Air Force pilot. But what's the story behind Yuri Gagarin, the man with a broad smile? Born on the 9th of March 1934 in the village of Kalishnev, Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin was the third of 4 children to his father Alexei and mother Anne, both farmers in a Soviet collective farm. Life was going well for the young Alexei. That was until the 18th of October 1941, when the Nazis occupied his village. Immediately, the Nazis burnt down the local school, and a German officer had taken over the Gagarin house, forcing the family to move into a 3-meter by 3-meter mud hut located in the backyard. During the occupation, Yuri worked as a saboteur, especially after a Nazi officer who was nicknamed by the kids Diablo, or the Devil, tried to kill his younger brother Boris. Yuri would often pour soil into the German tank batteries that were waiting to be recharged, or he would mix up those chemicals that were going to be used in the recharging process so that the batteries couldn't be recharged. When his older brother Valentin and older sister Zoya were taken by the Nazis as slave labor, Yuri, believing that they were dead, fell ill with grief. He was also suffering a beating he received from the Nazis, and so was placed in hospital as a patient. Later, he would be staying there as an orderly. He would, of course, be joined by his mother after the Nazis had gashed her leg with a scythe. After the Red Army had pushed the Nazis back, Yuri assisted them by locating the mines left behind by the fleeing Germans. In 1945, the Gagarin family was allowed a miracle, as the 2 older siblings had returned home. They had escaped the Germans and were helping the Soviets win the war. In 1946, the Gagarins moved to the village of Gazets, modern-day Gagarin. Yuri and his brother Boris enrolled in the local makeshift school that was run by a volunteer teacher. Later, a former Soviet airman would join the school and teach Yuri's favorite subjects of math and science. Yuri also showed a keenness for flying, having seen a Yakolev crash in his village during the war. So, Yuri joined a group of kids that were involved in building model aircraft. At age 16, Yuri began his apprenticeship as a foundryman in the steel plant in Lubersky. He also enrolled in the Young Workers' School for 7th grade evening classes. In the following year of 1951, Yuri graduated with honors in mold working and foundry work. He was then selected to train at the industrial school in Saratov, where he studied tractors. While in Saratov and on top of his studies, Yuri worked as a dock laborer on the Volga, and in the weekends, he trained as a Soviet air cadet, first flying biplanes and later moving to the Yakolev Yak-18. In 1955, Yuri was accepted into the first Chekhovsky Higher Pilot School in Orenburg. Initially, he flew the Yak-18, an aircraft he was already familiar with. But then later, he moved up to the MiG-15. Yuri had difficulties with the aircraft and in fact struggled to land it. That was until his instructor had given him a pillow to sit on. This allowed Yuri a greater field of vision, and by 1957, he was flying solo. During a May Day celebration in Red Square in Moscow, Yuri met a young music technician by the name of Valentina. The two of them hit it off, and by the 7th of November 1957, they had married. The couple would later have 2 children, Yelena and Galina. On the 5th of November, Yuri was commissioned with the rank of lieutenant within the Soviet Air Force. The next day, he graduated flight school and was posted to Lestari Air Base. After the launch of the Luna 3 probe, the Soviet space probe that first photographed the far side of the moon, Yuri expressed his interest in space exploration. So, on the 6th of October 1959, Lieutenant Colonel Babushka both recommended and endorsed Yuri to join the Soviet space program. And so, on the 6th of November, after being promoted to the rank of senior lieutenant, Yuri Gagarin joined the Soviet space program. While training for the Vostok program, Yuri, along with a bunch of other hopeful pilots, underwent a series of medical checks and tests conducted by the Central Flight Medical Commission, also by the Central Aviation Scientific Research Hospital in Moscow. The Soviet chief designer, Sergei Kuryelov, had specified that the pilots needed to be between the ages of 25 and 30 years old. They needed to weigh no more than 72 kgs and be no taller than 1.7 meters. Now, it is also claimed that Sergei requested that the pilot have a broad smile. And now Yuri, he fit the bill in every regard. From 154 hopefuls, the physicians had selected 29. Now, the Credentials Committee had further reduced this figure to just 20. On the 7th of March 1960, an initial group of 12 had been selected, of which Yuri Gagarin was one of. A further 8 would be added later on. On 15th of March 1960, the Cosmonaut hopefuls began training at the Kudenka airfield in downtown Moscow. The training was intense and repetitive. One candidate, Alexei Leonov, a cosmonaut who would eventually become the first human to walk in space, likened the training to Olympic athletes. By April of 1960, the candidates had begun parachute training at Saratov Oblast. They completed between 40 to 50 jumps each. When the candidates were asked to select someone other than themselves who they thought should make the first Vostok flight, all but 3 had selected Yuri Gagarin. On 30th of May 1960, 6 candidates were selected for an accelerated training program. These candidates were Anatoly Kukostrov, Andrei Nikolaev, Pavlo Popovich, German Titov, Valentin Valimov, and of course, Yuri Gagarin. And from these 6, the first Vostok cosmonauts would be chosen. During this course, the pilots were put through several physical and psychological tests, which included oxygen starvation and extreme G-force pressure tests. The tests also included being in complete isolation. So Yuri was in the isolation chamber from the 26th of July to the 5th of August. In January of 1961, the Sochi 6 were given the title Pilot Cosmonauts, and they entered into their final testing period. The tests included knowledge of the upcoming mission and of the Vostok capsule itself. Now, Yuri Gagarin had achieved the highest score, and so, on the 7th of April, Yuri Gagarin was selected as the first pilot cosmonaut, with Titov as his backup. On 12th of April 1961, about 0530 Moscow time, Yuri and his backup Titov were woken up at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. Both pilot cosmonauts got into their spacesuits and were transported to the launch pad. There, Yuri was loaded into the capsule of Vostok 1, and at 0000 hours, the communication systems came online. The capsule had failed its initial inspection, and so technicians then had to spend the next 40 minutes trying to fix the capsule's seal. Sergei Kuryelov had noted that Yuri was calm throughout all of this, and in fact had requested that music be played through the communication systems while he waited. At 0607, Sergei Kuryelov radioed, "Preliminary stage, intermediate main, liftoff. We wish you a good flight and everything is okay." To which Yuri replied, "Yakove!" or "Let's go" in English. 2 minutes into the flight, and the 4 booster rockets had dropped away from the core. At 0617, the Vostok's final stage shuts down. The capsule separates from the rocket, and Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin becomes the first human to look down on the Earth from space. Yuri's flight would take him around the planet. And at 0725, as his craft passed the west coast of Africa, the retro rockets fired. After the burn, the Vostok service module and re-entry model were meant to separate. However, they remained attached by a bundle of wires. At 0735, the craft starts to re-enter the atmosphere and begins to experience strong gravitations. As the wires broke, the craft was still experiencing strong gravitations. However, Yuri telegraphed back, "Everything is okay." Later he would say that he didn't want to make a noise because he reasoned that the gravitations posed no risk. However, he would experience up to 8 G's worth of pressure during his descent. At 0755, with the capsule being 7 kilometers from the surface, the hatch opens and Yuri ejects. At 0805, Yuri lands in a field in the Saratov region. He approaches a farmer and his daughter who had seen him land and were visibly scared. Yuri told them, "Don't be afraid. I am a Soviet like you who has descended from space, and I must telephone Moscow." Yuri Gagarin became an instant celebrity, not just within the Soviet Union, but worldwide. During a parade at the Kremlin, the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev awarded Yuri with the nation's highest award, the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. And cities across the USSR held massive parades, second only to the Victory Day parades. On the 15th of April 1961, Yuri, along with officials from the Soviet Assembly of Sciences, held a press conference which was attended by over 1,000 reporters. Yuri would then travel to countries around the world, including England, Bulgaria, Cuba, Czechoslovakia, Iceland, and others. However, the US President John Kennedy barred him from entering the United States. In 1962, Yuri began serving as a deputy to the Soviet of the Union and was elected to the Central Committee of the Young Communist League. He would then return to Star City and spend several years working on designs for reusable spacecraft. On the 12th of June 1962, he was promoted to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, and then to Full Colonel on the 6th of November 1963. On 20th December 1963, he became the Deputy Training Director for Star City. Soviet officials had been trying to prevent Yuri from flying in fear of losing the hero in an accident, noting that he was just too dear to mankind. 2 years later, Yuri was re-elected as a deputy of the Soviet Union, but this time to the Soviet of Nationalities, in the upper chamber of the legislature. In 1965, he was backup pilot for Vladimir Komarov in the Soyuz 1. However, Soviet officials were still opposed to him flying. On 24th of April 1967, the Soyuz 1, riddled with problems, crashed, tragically killing pilot cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov. Yuri was then permanently banned from spaceflight and from flying solo. Now this was something in which he always fought against. On 17th of February 1968, while grounded, Yuri successfully defended his thesis on spaceplane aerodynamics and graduated cum laude from the Zhukovsky Air Force Engineering Academy on 27th of March 1968. While flying a two-seater MiG-15 alongside instructor Vladimir Sergin, an accident occurred which caused the aircraft to crash outside the town of Kirzych. Now, there have been many theories as to the exact cause of the accident. Everything from a bird strike to another plane flying too close at supersonic speed. But regardless of the exact cause, the Soviet officials' worst fear had been realized. The legendary Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin had died. On 30th of March 1968, the man whose 1 hour 48-minute flight that had opened the doors to humanity's final frontier was given a full state funeral. His ashes now reside in the Kremlin walls, alongside other Soviet and Russian greats, including the chief designer Sergei Korolyov. On 20th of July 1969, the American astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, during their historic moon landing mission, left a satchel containing medals commemorating the pilot cosmonauts Gagarin and Komarov. Yuri Gagarin continues to be a source of inspiration for people around the world, and his broad smile will forever be written into our history. And so, with that, I say, Spasiba and do svidania.